Okay, you're up in Turmoil. Can't quite see. Let's see if we've got a little, I had a little bit of light here to what I had to use. I had to actually dim the lights for my old camera. But because the last review came out so crappy, I can't see. I could swing the damn thing around and see if I could see better. That's an interesting concept. What happens? Oh, geez. Yeah, that's still pretty dark. Anyway, at least I'm in the frame, which I can see, and I can see that it's recording, which is very cool. So, basically, if you're interested in sort of the gameplay mechanisms, it's very much like Twilight Struggle. I have not played 1989, but I suspect the stability cards, which I can't see, are very similar to what that game provides in terms of this little mini game that you play, kind of like, the combat cards in We the People were. I find they work pretty well, actually. I'm not dealing a random hand. I can plan for them in advance and everything. As an overall, I probably like this better than Twilight Struggle, but for reasons that I'm fairly certain the majority of people will say this really doesn't qualify as a Twilight Struggle type game. Even though the mechanisms are the same, very, very similar with the, hey, if I play a card for the points and it's got an opponent's event, it triggers that event, I've got a place to dump the events that I don't like in terms of the naval arms track, but I've got limitations on how many of my opponent's events I can do there. That whole concept ensures that a great deal of a great number of the historical events actually do happen, because you'll be holding your opponent's card and you have nothing to do. You must use it and you must trigger the event. In most cases, there may be a few that are extremely important that you can sink into the ocean, but for the most, throw into space in Twilight Struggle, but for the most part, all those events are going to come out, which means you're not really faced with the situation of points versus event in every choice that you have, which is often the case with each player having their own deck, for example, the games where that's the case, or where the events don't hurt you to play if you've got a shared deck. You're just playing for points if you can't have the event, and you're often making your own choice on your own events of, well, gee, my event doesn't particularly suit this moment right now, therefore I'll just play it for points, which is often a decision you're going to make in any CDG. You're often going to play the cards for their points rather than their event values. The way the board's represented and everything, it all feels very much like Twilight Struggle from my memory of it. I haven't played in a while. The support checks, I think, are kind of like the coup type mechanism in Twilight Struggle. Let me just peek. I seem to remember, I see from too far away for you to hear probably, that Twilight Struggle had more mechanisms in play. Let me take a quick look. This has been bothering me the whole time, that there was more to the game than there is here. You have realignment. Yeah, so you have realignment rolls which are similar to the support checks, but you also have coups in Twilight Struggle. And I don't even remember how coups work. I was thinking that those were the coups, but now I have to look. No, the coup looks like what I'm talking about there. No, they're similar. So this actually was the coup situation. Um, you play a coup, it uses your entire card, and you get to shoot things. On the realignment rolls, you get to roll, but there are similarities. They're kind of like mashed together in this, because coups were, less of a mechanism in use than generally nations were willing to commit their military into a situation if it really applied. Anyway, and this also has a more ideological focus. So, what is it that I like better about this than Twilight Struggle? Well, first of all, the topic, which probably isn't too big a positive for too many people. But I'm just much more interested in that pre-World War I diplomacy era. And it must be fairly popular because, diplomacy was kind of loosely modeled on that. But I've always liked, say, Pax Britannica, and wanted games that covered things a little bit better than that. In this goes into more depth in the political struggle of that liberal versus authoritarian, and steps away from the country struggle, which I find kind of intriguing, because if you're trying to set up a World War I game, it's actually the two-power war that's going to result that's of more interest than, just where did everybody get into in all those colonial areas. Another thing is, Pax Britannica tends to generate something that's, again, it's focused on the colonialism, and therefore it's not really representing the details of the military situation. So if you wanted to set up a World War I scenario, this might be a little bit of a stronger possibility than using Pax Britannica for that. Pax Britannica gives you kind of this overall military, but honestly, if the great powers were going to go to war, they would be able to pull their entire military together and mobilize completely, which I think this represents a fair view of. When I started thinking about how my game would ended and what that would mean, I'm ending in the Edwardian period, probably a good number of years, at least, probably around 1900, say, where there's just not a lot, because I think each of these is about 10 years in length. I'm ending the game in a period where the militaries largely were established in the ground forces, but then there's the question of how quickly would the air race start? How about the chemical weapons race? Those things would be very, very difficult to represent adequately in the game. One thing that would be easier to represent, although it may involve research, etc., is the naval race. This game goes into some detail on that, as to what ship classes were available. I have the dates in La Grande, which is one useful thing of that, when each ship was laid down. And I probably could do the same thing with Fatal Alliances as well. I haven't looked at it too carefully, but it's based on WIF, and in WIF, every counter has a year on it, which indicates when that counter became available. What I'd be missing, though, is some of the archaic pieces that maybe were decommissioned in, the decade and a half or so that was waiting for the game to occur. And again, in order to do this properly, you'd have to spend a lot of time researching. So what the hell does all that matter about the game? Well, that's one of the things that I find intriguing about a pre-World War I game, is this concept that maybe I could use it as a scenario generator. I'm always looking for that kind of thing. And I want to look at it as more than just, hey, what were the sides? Which I kind of get out of, Pax Britannica, and I could probably get out of Origins of World War I as well. This one I feel gives me more details and some more interesting aspects that I think I could funnel into that kind of exercise if I had the time and energy to do that. Okay, let's get back to the game though. I go off on these crazy tangents, just like I do with my personal life, because they're where my brain is. You know, my brain's not necessarily focused on the game itself. To me, the mechanism of the game, it's very Twilight Struggle-like. And I've discussed Twilight Struggle. I think it's a fantastic game. It really kind of, you know, shifted the world in a number of ways, the gaming world, in a number of ways. You didn't see too many games come off of it right away, but it definitely kind of injected a shot of something into CDGs in the sense that, well, you know, so many people played Twilight Struggle, then they're willing to try something, maybe, you know, an Unhappy King Charles or Washington's War or something like that, Hannibal, that takes them a step away and a little bit closer to an actual war game, which is an intriguing thing, and I think is very, very helpful. This topic means that people aren't going to be as likely, I think. I think that Cold War dynamic and that association country versus country is more appealing to people than the idea of liberal versus authoritarian currents across several different governments. It's harder to associate yourself with, yes, I am the forces of liberalism, or I'm the forces of repression. It's very hard to align with that in the same way as, say, you know, aligning with the U.S. versus Soviet conflict across the world. The other thing that really, really is going to prevent this from being appealing to a large segment of the Twilight Struggle people, the people who, you know, love it, is Twilight Struggle played as sort of a chess-like match. Yes, there's some randomness in the cards in Twilight Struggle, but you could almost always, it was almost always more important how well you played the game. I don't get that feeling with this. I get the feeling that there's enough. I mean, clearly, you know, if you play a match of, say, best out of 3 or something, probably the best player is going to win that match, or, you know, extend it out a few, trade places, whatever. However, it is quite possible, both through the randomness of the cards, which to some extent feel a little bit swingier. There feels like there's a little bit more capability for things to maybe destabilize a little bit. Maybe, you know, I'm used to Twilight Struggle, the points for the Soviets screaming up towards the top early on. So that's not that different from the authoritarians starting out with sort of a stronger position early in the game where they can really score some more points early on and maybe take a shot at winning that automatic victory. So I'm not really concerned with that. What I saw, I don't think was so much a randomness effect, although some of the cards feel a little bit more random than they do in Twilight Struggle. I think, it's hard to tell, you know, I just felt a little bit more battered around, but I probably felt pretty battered around the first time I played Twilight Struggle. But when I look at that final game victory conditions, when you come down to the last turn of the game and you're either basically rolling a die to see how many, you know, if the game had ended in a great war in the game that I had, it was basically 2 people rolling a die at even odds, and whoever gets the higher roll just wins. Right? And they don't win the game automatically by that. If they had a big lead in the game but didn't have the Great War nations aligned properly, losing the Great War would be a possibility. Like it could be a close die roll on that, and then, you know, it might be that the things that take place that change you to the Great War situation during the Great War resolution might not be enough to push somebody over the edge, because they've already got so many scoring areas in place. But still, you're looking at a die roll worth of SPs kind of changing hands in each scoring region. And then only those scoring regions that happened in will get rescored at the end of the game. So, you know, if Russia stays out of the war somehow, and it's possible, they just don't get scored. They become unimportant to the post-war scoring, whatever, which feels a little weird, but okay. It almost feels to me like, hey, you know, if somebody managed to stay isolationist, how they stayed might be of great importance to how the post-war world would kind of shake out. But, you know, victory conditions are what they are, and it kind of makes sense to say, let's let the people who actually fought the war help determine the peace. Nations that weren't involved in the war, Russia had very little effect, even though they were in the war, on the immediate post-world situation. They were in chaos, so I don't know, you could probably say an isolationist country would have very little effect. I don't think that's true, though. I think that's a hard argument to make. But anyway, how satisfying is the idea of a game which could pretty much lie on a single die roll at the end of the game? If you have a close fought, evenly balanced situation, excuse me, choking and phlegm here. There we go. If you have a close fought, evenly balanced situation, in terms of the Great War, and in terms of the scoring, it could well come down to that die roll. How much more terrible, though, is that than, like, you know, I don't know, the coin games, where it almost always feels to me like it comes down to the last draw that the scenario could possibly hold. The last programmed victory point card in the game gets drawn because everybody's trying to keep each other balanced. I don't know. But it feels so baked into the system here, like it does with the coin games, that it would be difficult to end up in a circumstance where people are playing closely to each other, where that doesn't happen. On the other hand, we saw an automatic victory, so who am I to say? But again, I don't feel like I knew enough, was on the ball enough, etc., to play particularly well. In fact, I know I played particularly poorly and made a rules error or two that influenced the Liberals negatively. So this maybe shouldn't have gone into an automatic victory, but such is life. Anyway, I don't mind things like that. I don't insist that my games be incredibly competitive, that the best player almost always wins or anything like that. What I feel is, you know, I'm more interested in seeing the story unfold, and there's a lot of chaos and randomness in the real world, a lot of things that you can't directly correlate this event to this action, etc. And situations aren't always, you know, perfectly balanced. Certainly World War I was not perfectly balanced by any stretch of the imagination at any point. And if you look at the gestalt of it with the U.S., you know, say if they were programmed to come in, well, yeah, you know, it's over. It's over. Eventually the U.S. Production capability will overwhelm whatever the Germany could produce. But anyhow, those things don't bother me. And indeed, I find that kind of being buffeted around feeling kind of nice. I like it. I felt like the game ended too quickly, but that's kind of a good feeling too. It's the, I wouldn't mind playing this game. That's not okay. Okay. And I am growing fonder and fonder and more interested in like trying to buy all the Compass games that intrigue me. Unfortunately, because their pricing schedule isn't quite the same, it doesn't motivate me the way the GMT P500 does. And they come out with so many games that I'm interested in that it's very, very difficult for me. You know, I'm like, well, I can't pre-order 6 games, you know? I mean, that's just craziness. So a company like Legion, which, you know, prints very, very few games a year, and just a couple that I'm interested in, and most, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll pre-order those. GMT with their fall sale and this kind of, well, yeah, we'll give you 50% off an equal number of games that you pre-ordered from. Well, that seems like a deal. I'm not sure how much of one it is, but I know I'm saving money overall on the games, even if I went and ordered from some of the cheaper online places. But I'm getting too many games, you know, and sometimes ones that I'm less interested in than I am in the Compass stuff. But unfortunately, just psychologically, both of those models work better to getting me to pre-order things than the Compass model does, which is a sad thing, because Compass, if anybody, is putting out more games that I'm intrigued by. But anyway, speaking to Compass, one of the things they've had a regular issue with is some of the graphic design issues. And I do find with this game's not bad, but I do find there are still some issues. I found it a little difficult to read the map. Now, this may be my lighting and eyesight, but someplace like Alsace-Lorraine here, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's got 2 symbols in it. It's got, I assume you can't, it's got an annexation and a worker symbol, and the annexation symbol kind of gets lost. I feel like their graphic design work is too often good at hiding things. They're, you know, the design was there to put the thing in the right place, but then they just didn't actually make it visible enough for me, at least. Some of the cards, I seem to remember having questions on some of the cards. I think there was at least one where I had to run down and look up to see, hey, how does this actually work, and call up the errata or whatever. But for the most part, I've been seeing this slew of questions. Like, I subscribed to this, I just saw a slew of questions on it. And I've been wondering what that was. Did it mean that the game was terrible in terms of, like, the cards really, really don't explain enough? No. For the most part, they're pretty damn explanatory, and I did not find much trouble between the rules and the cards, anything like that. So my other assumption is a fair number of Twilight Struggle type people played it, and they're more discriminating in terms of, like, okay, if there's any other way that I can interpret this rule than what seems obvious, because I'm playing in such a competitive mindset, I'm going to be interested in, is it this way or that way? You know, which is, I'm absolutely not convinced, though, that there's any problem with these cards. They felt largely understandable. There was maybe one, there was one that I had to look up, and I don't remember. You can go look in the first video or whatever. And a couple that, you know, maybe I had to think about a little bit. These counters, the informational counters with the little images, those I found very difficult to differentiate, but, you know, it just is a matter of focusing a little harder on the counter and the card and seeing which one goes where. Some of them did not give as much information as they needed to, so I had to keep the card in play near them so that I could reference them. It would be more useful if I don't know, if they boldly said something, but it's not a big deal. I can understand wanting to improve the beauty of the counters by not having lots of words on them or anything. The naval arms race seems to have a lot more effect than the space race does in Twilight Struggle. I barely used this thing, the player aid. Was just easier to look in the rules, and I'm sure this could be useful, but I found the rules actually fairly approachable in terms of finding things. Maybe not absolutely clear on first read through, but as playing, it became a perfectly fine reference, and I had no issue whatsoever with that. Kind of looks nice too, and it looks like pencil might actually stick on this. It's not a glossy, it's very pretty. I guess the only gripe I have with the cards is they're that very sturdy, stiff stock. I prefer something with a little bit more flexibility. I'm not convinced that these things last any longer than more flexible design cards. But yeah. So anyway, I'm probably telling you all kinds of things you don't want to know, and you're not that interested in about the game, and you're like, well, you know, the sum of it is that it's something that seems like a fun, playable Twilight Struggle knockoff, mostly, set in a different period with a little bit more randomness to it. That randomness could be a big negative point to the people who want that ultra competitive game. For me, this does everything Twilight Struggle does in a better fashion. You know, I prefer that randomness. I prefer seeing that kind of narrative. I was not disturbed at all by the play of the stability cards, which I thought would be annoying. The only thing that I hold negative about them is you really should know your opponent's stability cards. You should know what they're capable of doing, and I almost wish there was a cheat sheet of what each person had for stability cards. You know, obviously somebody could make one online or whatever. Just because when you're making your choices, that feels like that's something where knowledge of those cards, real intimate, you know, understanding of what the opponent is capable of doing and what they're not, would help a lot. So that might have influenced, I might have, if I had that kind of information in front of me and chose to pay attention to it, which is a big F, like in a coin game, I might have been able to say, you know what, I can't afford to play the France scoring card at this point because I see how many points it will be. I didn't think it was going to be that many, and it just barely hit them to the 20-point place. And it wasn't simply from the scoring, it was because of a stability card which was able to generate one extra victory point. At the very least, I shouldn't be taking chances like that, right? But I didn't feel like that, I went with a gut impression there, and I didn't feel like there were going to be anywhere near that many victory points swinging. It was a lot, and enough that surprised me, just like the Balkans when they first came out for the Liberals, were enough that surprised me. Some of those victory point cards, that may be another big difference with Twilight Struggle. I don't feel like in Twilight Struggle there were that big a swing off the victory point cards, which means that when the victory point cards come out, where they land, who gets them when, that has more of a capability to destabilize the game and end in an automatic victory. I think it is more likely there, which, you know, that's something you can defend against. You can make sure that you're in the running in all the places so that it doesn't become such a swingy game, or you can play to, you know what, let me take my chances because I'm not sure I'm the better player at playing that conservative game. I may not be capable of doing it. Anyway, overall, I'm really glad I got this. If you're looking for an equivalent to the super competitive Twilight Struggle, this may disappoint, but if you're looking for something that plays in the same sort of style of play, but on a different topic, and still seems like a very solid game with a lot of fun, you know, a lot of opportunity for enjoyment in it. I definitely recommend this, and you know, getting happy about my last couple plays of Compass games. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've had one that I said, "Wow, I'm really kind of unhappy with this." So yeah, I feel, and they're aiming for things that intrigue me more than any other company. I just wish I could devote myself more to their games, both financially and time-wise, to be honest. Because one of the factors that comes into it isn't just the money situation. It's the, well, what am I going to have time to play? Oh my God, I had to buy all these GMT games. Now I'm not going to have time to hit these things that kind of intrigue me. Well, maybe I should stop buying as many GMT games. But they're like crack, man. All right.